doing the rounds is Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. From an interview in 2021, he said that women like Kamala Harris who haven't had children are, and I quote, childless cat ladies who are miserable in their own lives and have no direct stake in America. How do you think that might play?
Well, I think that's going to galvanise very much the Liberals as well. But women who haven't had children, it happened in Britain. Theresa May was accused of not having children. I think it's incredibly divisive, and it's exactly what will rally women in the same way, actually, that I think the abortion issues, which comes as big here, really will rally women in America. I think that Kamala Harris is very good on that she's made it very clear where she stands on abortion, and she's very much pro women's rights, and so I think that will make a difference, actually. And I think the idea that just because you're single and well, she's not even single, actually, but you're married, but you don't have children.
She has stepchildren.
Yes, and she's obviously great with stepchildren, and they adore her, and they've been at a lot of her campaign and rallies. They are there, so she sounds like she's a great stepmother.
Yes, it is interesting how the question of children continues to raise its head. As somebody, I've seen a couple of people say this, that as far as they know, there's been no president in the White House that has actually given birth so far. But let me turn as well, because you were talking about young voters, as Singh did as well, and I suppose the social media presence that she has. There was an increase between 2016 and 2020 by 11%, the 18 to 29-year-olds. Tufts University did research on that. They only have data on 41 states, might I add. But do you think they can be trusted to turn out just because she's having a moment on social media?
Well, that's what we don't know, is that whether TikTok then relates to votes. And in Britain, it didn't that much. I mean, Nigel Farage was quite good, weirdly, on TikTok, and that didn't relate in the end to that many younger voters voting for reform. So you can't tell. But I think she has got this momentum behind her, which is fascinating, because it's been so stuck with these two very elderly men, really. And she's 59, she seems young in comparison. So I just wonder whether she will galvanise the younger vote. And it'll be interesting to see if she can do it, because it will be the first election that's going to be played out on social media to that extent.
What I'm quite enjoying, and many people are, is that a woman in her 50s by the media is now being considered young.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled. I'm 47.
We're in the club. It's so good to have you on, Alice. Thank you so much, and Alice's piece today, taking a look at all these issues that we have been discussing this morning on Women's Hour. A new film, The Commandant's Shadow, follows Hans-Jürgen Huss, the 87-year-old son of Rudolf Huss, the camp commander of Auschwitz, who masterminded the murder of more than 1 million Jews. The life of Huss and his family was recently fictionalized in the Academy Award-winning film Presented in Trust. Now, The Commandant's Shadow tells the story of some of the real people who lived on the other side of the war at Huss's concentration camp. While Hans Huss enjoyed a happy childhood playing many toys in the family villa at Auschwitz, Anita Lasker Ralfish was playing the cello in order to survive the notorious concentration camp. 8 decades later, the two came face to face, together with their children, Kai Huss and Maya Lasker Ralfish. Anita and Maya join me now. You're both so welcome to Women's Hour. Thank you for coming on the programme and to tell us a little bit more about this extraordinary film. Anita, why did you want to do it?
I just did it. I didn't particularly look for it. I mean, it just happened.
It just happened. Well, I'll tell you, watching it, it's so compelling and gripping, quite difficult almost to take in all that has happened to you in your long life. You're 99 now as well. I probably should tell our listeners that. Just a remarkable woman that you are. Tell me a little about your childhood in Germany before the war.
I had a very happy childhood before 1933, and then everything started going wrong. I didn't even know that I was Jewish. Then somebody actually spotted me in the street, and it happened suddenly in 1933. I was 8 years old then.
Your father had decided that he didn't want to leave Germany. I think some of your friends and neighbours had decided to. But at one point then your parents were taken away.
And my father was convinced that the Germans can't be that stupid. He had great faith in people's intelligence, and he was wrong.
reiterate that as well, the stupidity that was just unimaginable as you said it. But you are a cellist, you were a founder member of the English Chamber Orchestra, and you talk about it was your cello that saved you. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened after your parents were taken away?
I'll try to make it as short as possible. It so happened when I eventually, after a great odyssey, arrived in Auschwitz, I found out that there was I can't call it an orchestra, a band there. Happened to not have a cello at the moment, and I seem to have arrived at the right moment. So I was very lucky all the time. I was lucky.
And then you were playing. I was like, why would that band be there? But it was to entertain the soldiers?
No, our job was really to play for the people who marched out to work in the factories that surround Auschwitz. We played marches for the people to walk out in the morning, and we did the same in the evening. That was our basic job.
Your parents were not at Auschwitz. They were taken to the east, is my understanding, and they were killed by the Nazis. I have a lot of information. But I want to turn to you, Maya. Growing up, were you aware of what happened to your mother, Anita, and also to her parents?
I absolutely was not aware on any conscious level, but I certainly always had a sense of knowing there was something very, very wrong, and that there was no other family that resembled ours. Because growing up in London as I did, I was surrounded by people, well, I never came across, as I said, any kind of relatable families, so I knew that we were different, and I knew it wasn't a good thing to be different, and of course children want to be the same as each other, so that was something that completely escaped me. But conscious knowing didn't happen until much, much, much later, because my mother didn't talk about it.
Anita, why did you not talk about it?
How can you talk about it? You know, we weren't asked. I mean, I hear that often. You never told us anything, but I mean, you never asked. It's not really a topic of conversation, you know.
But are you talking about when you first arrived? It's different to why you didn't tell my brother and I. Different reasons.
It's difficult to talk about it. Tell me, what was it like in Auschwitz?
Of course. You did come to England. You very much settled there, it seems, Anita.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you grew up also, Maya, as you mentioned, in the UK. You talk about this difference, and I know you are a psychotherapist who has studied intergenerational trauma, and the film was inspired by a book you wrote in Germany 5 years ago. How would you say that intergenerational trauma manifested? Because I know you said it was different, but can you be specific what feeling was and indeed the actions?
Well, for me, it was actually specifically about my own experience, because there's always a feeling of unbelonging and otherness, which was profoundly isolating and lonely. So what it looked like and what it felt like was that I was always on the outside of everything. For whatever reason, the one thing that was relatable and the connection within my family, those my parents and my brother, was music. And that was their collective experience, which I wasn't part of. So it's an experience of being, as I've said, completely alone and bewildered, because there is no context in which to understand what on earth you're doing here, or how to do this thing or anything.
Because of what has happened before.
Because of what's happened before, but also the horror that my mother couldn't speak about. She did not want to completely traumatize her children by answering a question like, why you have no grandparents? Because they lie in a mass grave speak of it. I know many survivors do. Is there a right way or wrong way? I just think it's different. But not knowing does not mean not feeling and experiencing. So unconsciously, the trauma was embedded in me, I think, always. So I believe it is environmental and epigenetic. The science of epigenetics, which was a great relief to me, shows that there is an actual cellular manifestation where something is, identifiably impacted upon.
So, Anita, you have heard this from Maya before, and I was very struck in the film by the line when you said you were the wrong mother for your daughter. Can you tell our listeners what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean that my sister was very interested in things that I am not interested in, like nice clothes and jewelry and also. And I always thought that Maya would fit better to be the daughter of my sister because they had the same interests. I'm a very basic person. I don't need anything.
Renata was your sister, but sorry, Anita, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
That was a flippant remark that I made.
But
I thought that my daughter should be the daughter of my sister rather than mine.
But it is it's a really interesting concept, Anita. I think this may resonate with a lot of people about being the wrong mother for your daughter, because it goes deeper again as you meet the family of the commandant that they didn't choose their father or grandfather in that instance either. The family, you don't get to choose, right? They're there. I wonder, Maya, how you're looking at that, connections or relationship.
Do you mean specifically in relation to what Mum describes as a flippant comment?
Yes.
Well, it's really interesting because it's not the first time my mum has said it. There have been many occasions, and it's very often a question like yourself that if people are very curious about. So I think I understand the context in which Mum says it, although that's a fairly new, I've only recently come to understand that's what she means. So those words without the context were very difficult to hear because you don't get to choose. And I didn't even really on a conscious level know how very different my mother was to other people's mothers. Or how German my mother is until I went to live in Germany.
Because you wanted to live in Germany, you applied for German citizenship, and when your German passport arrived, you mentioned about being elated, and in the film, Anita also comes to visit you. But I want to talk about another visit. You went to Auschwitz with both the son of Commandant Huss and his grandson, Kai. Anita, you declined to go back to Auschwitz, but you did meet them in your home in London. What was it like to be sitting opposite that family, having a coffee, eating some cake?
It was strange, but I think it was necessary because there needs to be a sort of, I don't say understanding, but get together and confront a situation. This is all second generation stuff. They are not guilty of anything, but they carry a terrible burden. And that evening was very interesting. There I'm sitting in my sitting room and received the son of the worst murderer you can imagine. But I think it was a very good meeting.
I should say for listeners as well that Commandant Huss was hanged for his crimes following the Nuremberg trial. You, Maya, went to Auschwitz, as I mentioned briefly there, with both gentlemen, with Hans and Kai. And you say in some perverse way, this was a gift. I think that part of the film is very difficult to watch. I can't imagine what it must have been like to go.
Well, it was a gift, and I chose it. I didn't have to do it. I chose it, and I wasn't consciously making a film. I was in a process, I was in an experience, which was a very, very important experience. And the gifts are many, in that I discovered, because you can't pre-plan for such a thing, obviously, I discovered things about myself. I just obviously discovered things about the hearse who I was accompanying. And I also found things that I didn't know were lost in a symbolic sense. So, and it was an opportunity to be part of a process, an essential process, which is about trying, because that's all we can do, to shift a grain of sand. And I witnessed the horrendous suffering, which is worse than mine as a second generation person. You know, I didn't have to look at my grandparents' gallows. I had to look at what was a mass grave. That's awful. But they were the best, and the Husk came from the worst, and that is irreconcilable.
Hans is an elderly man now. I think, this is just my observation, that perhaps he hadn't totally realised the horror of what his father had carried out until he went to Auschwitz. Would that be fair, Maya?
Absolutely. He went as an innocent. He had protected himself with what I would call as a psychoanalyst manic defense, a pathological defense, which facilitated his life till his elderly age. Obviously it was the first time. And he went in full of happy memories. He went in full of happy memories. He did not leave full of happy memories.
And I probably should describe this as well, that the villa where he lived, his father, Commandant Huss, the wife, Hedwig, his brothers and sisters, was just a number of yards from Auschwitz, and it does question how would he not have sensed what was happening in the environment. He insisted that he didn't.
I have something interesting to say
Yes.
about that. What happened was, well, yes, his statement was he remembered nothing, but then he walked in the footsteps and he remembered. When he was in his bedroom, as you saw, I think, in the film, he remembered. So memory plays all sorts of tricks. It was able to be buried until he was in the space. And initially, they were happy memories in the sitting room, in the kitchen, whatever. But when he was in his bedroom and saw
The walls, yeah.
realised, yes, I saw this and I knew what it was.
Anita, you say in the film that trauma is not just on the survivor's side. You have such a generosity of spirit that you were able to meet with them, but also understand their trauma.
It's a difficult to imagine that trauma. It must be terrible to live like that. But I mean, my desire is that we should communicate with each other, talk to each other before we kill each other. Very simple, really.
Because you also, and I want to just get this point from you, Anita, a number of times through the film, you talk about anti-Semitism now, you talk about a young boy, if he's wearing a skull cap or a kippah, that he may not be safe walking down the street in certain places.
Unfortunately, that is true. Anti-Semitism didn't take long for it to come out to the open again, as if people were just waiting. And everything that happened in Israel was so absolutely dreadful that I don't even want to think about it. What sparked all this terrible anti-Semitism? What's the matter with the Jews? You know, Jews have been around forever. And, my great wish would be there should be a museum about Jewish history. That we understand why are there Jews all over the world. Maybe they've been thrown out of their country thousands of years ago. Jews all over the world.
Anita, a remarkable woman, 99 years of age, although hard to believe as we speak to you. The film is The Commandant's Shadow, and Maya is her daughter. I want to thank both of you for coming on for our conversation. Maya and Anita Lasker Valfish, and you will be able to see that particular movie when it comes to selected cinemas this week, and it'll be on Sky later in August. I want to turn to a new study that has found that women in Scotland have reached a landmark moment in business, with the number of female entrepreneurs matching the number of men for the first time. The Global Entrepreneurship Monitor report, compiled by the University of Edinburgh, Glasgow and Strathclyde, found 8.6% of working-age women in Scotland were running or setting up a new business in 2023, compared with 9.8% of men, something the report describes as a statistical parity. Well, joining me right now is primary school teacher turned tech entrepreneur Jenna Masterson, and runs a business in Glasgow. Welcome, Jenna. You were a primary school teacher. What led you into business, and what business do you do?
Good morning, thanks for having me. So my start-up was called Kyoto, and it was born out of frustration during my time as a primary teacher and my own lived experience in the early years of knowing how important emotional regulation skills and parenting skills, language development is to cope with the racial gap. And what I developed wasn't available until I joined government Technical Initiative and realised myself as a non-technical person who could become a tech entrepreneur.
And so you did, but it is interesting. You talked about an initiative there by the government that seemed to kind of give you that push into it. How did you find the process? I mean, I've spoken to female entrepreneurs before that have often said it's so hard to get the investment compared to men. This study seems to, or analysis seems to contradict that. How was it for you?
The report celebrates that entrepreneurial activity between men and women has parity. There obviously are still issues and barriers that face women around raising investment and to be able to compete with their male counterparts in scaling businesses. So I absolutely do have anecdotal experience of how difficult that can be.
For example?
For example, an entrepreneur of the same journey time as me has had a meeting with an investor and raised investment off the back of that one meeting, whereas I've been told it would take me up to 9 months to raise investment, 50 to 100 conversations to raise investment. And also as better independent and what capacity built in. I was in Scotland, we're really strong on like medtech, life sciences, renewable energy, startup innovation. But for my sector, which is known as pre-K EdTech, so early years EdTech, the market for that is huge globally, but Scotland maybe hasn't materialised in that sense yet.
So that's interesting, because that might be a market that might be more dominated by women. I saw the term investable woman. So you're kind of saying it takes 9 months to get to that?
That's what they're saying on average at the moment.
You could have a baby in that time.
Well, we do speak that putting a startup into the world is like birthing something into the world. So, yeah, you definitely have to know that it's not going to happen overnight, and I do have to stop it for that now.
And I'm also thinking back to some women that I spoke to, that they felt there was kind of a ready-made network for some men and not so much for women. Has that changed? Is it there?
I've definitely found myself in situations where I've made people uncomfortable because they're not used to a female showing up in certain spaces, and I have experienced that. But because I've been so welcomed by the initiatives and the support bodies, like in the innovation districts around the universities in Scotland, where there's high innovation, people looking to raise investment, create scalable business models through internationalising what we've created, that they've welcomed me in, and therefore even when I do have to show up in a room where I'm the only woman or face a panel to get reviews where it's only men at the other side, I have the confidence and ambition now to compete and get myself in the room.
What would your number one tip be for a woman who's thinking, I'm going to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I would advise I've used to find other women who have the same ambition as you to feel part of a community that exists locally or nationally. Understand that you're not the only one facing these barriers, but together we can knock the walls down, knock the doors down. It definitely is about unity and not doing it on your own, finding coaches, mentors, etc.
You now see yourself like a tech entrepreneur, is that fair?
Yeah, and I really want to naturally not join the Tech Team Initiative. Within 3 months, my identity has completely shifted. I found myself with a whole new network, and yeah, that's Joanne, a tech founder, a female tech founder, for sure.
Jenna Masterson, best of luck with your business, all related to a new study finding that women in Scotland, now, as they say, or women in Scotland are at parity with male entrepreneurs. So we can have good news there. Now, is there something that you really think we should be talking about on Women's Hour? Maybe something that you've never heard before. Last year we featured a woman, a school teacher, who had been struggling with the uncontrollable urge to shoplift throughout her life. She shared the impact this criminal activity has had on her and her attempts to get help for a recent diagnosis of kleptomania.
The actual taking of something gives you a psychological boost, for want of a better word, and for that short amount of time you actually feel good, but then that's taken away pretty much immediately by shame and fear of being caught. Just walking home feeling that everyone's looking at you, everyone knows that you're not who you say you are, and then actually when you get home, if you have got away with it, not even being able to eat or prepare some of the stuff that you've bought because the guilt is so much.
I remember that interview, it really stayed with me. Have you got a confession that maybe you'd like to share with the audience? We have here. Maybe there's something else you think we should be speaking about. The way to get in touch, 84844. Text charge at your standard message rate, or on social media at BBC Women's Hour, or of course you can email us through our website. Lots of you getting in touch already. Really lovely to see some of the ideas that you're sharing. Keep them coming. Who is your emergency contact? Is it your partner or somebody else? Well, when my next guest, Australian comedian Sashi Burger, went on her honeymoon, she was shocked to find out her new husband had not written her name down. Former refugee lawyer turned comedian has been asking her audiences and found there's a trend. So your loved one might be a ride or die, but not always the person you want to call in an emergency. She's been in Europe touring show boundaries. She's going to be heading to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe this summer. Sashi, welcome to Women's Hour.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, let's talk about this emergency contact theory. I have some messages that have come in. I'll get to them in a moment. What led to your discovery that not everybody has a reciprocal idea on whose name should be down there?
It was a very shocking personal experience. Thank you for asking. He's going to be thrilled that I'm radio about this. It's just the gift that keeps on giving for him. But we were on a honeymoon and we were scuba diving, filling out our emergency contact forms. And I actually had this really lovely moment where I was like, oh, I have an emergency contact for life now. And I looked at him lovingly and I looked at his form and I was not his emergency contact. So a very sweet moment kicked off an immediate fight there.
What day of the honeymoon was this?
It was day 3,
Oh,
so
dear.
we had 48 hours of joy and
And then honeymoon period over and reality bites.
absolutely.
But I was watching some of your Instagram reels about where you're testing it with your audiences. Apparently your partner, your husband now, is not alone in this. Talk us through what you found.
He's absolutely not, and I've really loved doing it. I like it when you hit on something that you think is only a personal experience and you find out that it applies globally. And often, not always, I must preface it by saying that, but often the woman's emergency contact is her partner and her partner's emergency contact is their parent, which I have been finding very, very, very funny. And I was recently watching Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Have you watched that TV show?
And I watched the film many years ago.
Yeah, so they've remade it as a TV series, and it came up in an episode there where that exact set of circumstances happened, and I thought, all right, I'm right on the money on this one.
But why do you think the main lead, not all, men are choosing, and is it the father or the mother that they pick?
No, they put their mum down. No dads in this whole situation coming into play.
Okay, what's that all about?
I don't know.
If you have an idea what that's all about, 84844. I did see one here. A person got in touch. She says, you know, is your emergency contact your romantic partner? Definitely not my husband. He never picks his phone up. So, I mean, maybe that's it about the partners. Maybe their mum picks up for them, and maybe their other half does not. You haven't always been a stand-up comedian. Before this, you were a refugee lawyer. You even called yourself a recovering refugee lawyer. Why?
Well, I think a lot of lawyers might identify with this, but we have a deep embedded need to be right all the time, and I'm trying to accept that I am wrong quite often, and that there's quite a process that I'm working through. But yeah, no, I did work as a refugee lawyer. I worked for 10 years in different countries, and ended up in Melbourne to do my master's in law, always intending to go back overseas. But then I found comedy. How funny is that? Life can just take some twists and turns.
But that is quite a jump. How did it come about? I mean, were you doing it on the side? You did say that being a woman of colour and a lawyer confused people sometimes.
It did. As a refugee lawyer, on my first day in 3 different places, they thought I was the refugee, not the lawyer. Yeah,
I'm slack-jawed.
It's a interesting place to be brown, that area. I don't know if that's the polite word here. I forget the acronym for not being Caucasian changes depending on what country you're in. I'm not up to date with the language here, but I just use brown because it's easier. But yeah, there's been a lot of situations where people are confused because I am the colour of the refugee, not the lawyer, which is very, very odd.
You kind of makes me think of your new show. It's called Boundaries, which you're taking to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, as you mentioned. And it was talking to your therapist that you came up with the concept of this show. And I also heard you talking about boundaries as well as boundaries. What are you trying to get across?
It's defining the limits in our relationship with our family, partners, friends, and especially in this relationship with my husband. He's white Australian, I'm brown Sri Lankan, who has grown up in the white Australian community for a very long time. And they're two different ways of living. So Sri Lankans, it's a very collectivist society. It's all about what the community wants, what the community needs, what the community thinks. Individualist societies are much more about the individual. So individual wants, individual needs, individual food allergies, very important. So trying to balance those two things has provided much hilarity that I'm trying to work through. And my therapist, she was very, very lovely, and she said you need to draw a circle around yourself and maintain a healthy distance from which to love your family. And I just looked at her like she was mad. Like this is not something that exists in the Sri Lankan community. And yeah, I did. I said I grew up with boundaries, which is the same circle that everyone from the island of Sri Lanka is inside it.
Right, so there is none. There is no boundary.
There are zero boundaries, and they're just two very different ways of living, and we're trying to balance it. She gets really annoyed when I test material on her, so she didn't laugh, but everyone else has, so I seek validation outside that room.
Well, I'm wondering, is comedy also a sort of therapy? Because even though you're talking about, personal life and trying to ring fence some of that, you have been really open about all aspects of your life on stage, including your fertility struggles and 4 miscarriages. Why do you decide to share those things?
So the fertility struggles I actually haven't shared on stage yet. I've written about them online, but because I haven't processed that properly yet, I haven't been able to write jokes about it. A lot of the time it's only once for me, I can only write jokes once I'm past that stage of my life. So past that stage where I was getting in fights with my family and parents about all these things, I've processed it and made it funny. I can write a story about it. But with the fertility struggles, we just had our 4th miscarriage in February. Thank you. But I've really enjoyed writing about it because I find it much easier to communicate in that medium. And many, many, many women have reached out about how much that's meant to them, because I don't think people talk about it. People talk about it once it's already happened because they say, well, these were our struggles, but now I have a baby, or but now I'm okay. And I'm kind of in that place where I don't know if I'm okay, but I'm trying to work through it, and reaching out to many people who have gone through it has really helped me.
And I just said I'm sorry. And I know many people will say that, but is there something that you want as a response, particularly after multiple miscarriages, or something that you don't want as a response? I mean, maybe sorry sounds trite, I don't know.
Oh, it doesn't sound trite at all. I think the issue is that everyone deals with grief in such a different way. This is the thing, there's no one way that people can process grief, and it's been a really difficult thing for me and my husband to navigate. But for me, I want to be able to talk about it just like any other health problem. You know, like I did my knee in at the beginning of last year at a touch rugby game. And everyone could see that I was struggling because I'm on crutches, and they can see how long the recovery is and what that takes out of you. And we can chat through it, what's involved and what's next. But with miscarriages, I feel like often you are managing the emotions of the person that you're speaking to, because they're like, oh my gosh, that is the worst thing that could ever happen. And that reaction stops you from being able to discuss it. And that's really hard because you just feel like it was just ruining everyone's day. So I thought by just kind of putting it into the world, maybe we can become a bit more comfortable, kind of like, look, yes, it's hard, but many of us go through things that are hard, and it's really nice to be able to talk about it for me.
Yes, and indeed, I should underline you have the Substack as well, which of course has a lot of your writings as well, Sashi Pereira. Thank you for sharing all that.
Was it too much? God, I talked for ages. Rude. This is supposed to be your show.
You're the guest.
Yeah, sure.
Let us talk just briefly. Edinburgh coming up. Every time I've gone to the festival, I've loved it, and the sun has been shining. How much are you looking forward to?
I've never been. I am so excited. I've only ever done the Northern Comedy Festival, and I've heard it's like that, but with to the power 100. And I am. This is a very embarrassing confession, but I am obsessed with magicians. I love magicians. I love magic. I've heard there's heaps everywhere, just in the street. So yes, comedy and magic. Looking forward to it.
Have a great time. That is Sashi Pereira, and Boundaries is the show, and she is on her way to Edinburgh. Thanks for spending some time with us here on Women's Hour. I want to turn to a new malaria vaccine, licensed for children 5 months or older. It began its rollout in the Ivory Coast last week. It's expected to reach, listen to these figures, 6.6 million children in 15 African countries in 2024 and 2025. This is after more than a century of scientific effort to develop effective vaccines against malaria. It is the first to meet the World Health Organization's target of 75% efficacy at preventing the disease. Infants, children, and also pregnant women are at a higher risk of severe infection, but vaccine use for adults has not yet been approved. There was a documentary on Monday, you might have seen it, The Battle to Beat Malaria. It was on BBC Two, and it tells this history of the vaccine and follows the scientists who made it. Here's one of the professors involved, Katie Moore, receiving the results from the final phase of testing.
So we have the result of phase 3. So big win, as expected from phase 2. So really interesting results in there. But yeah, really good and really reassuring, and yeah, very happy.
Very happy. I watched this yesterday, as I did also the Commandant's Shadow. Let me tell you, there was a few tears shed yesterday. I'm joined now by Dr. Marion Adatu, Clinical Research Fellow at the University of Oxford, who played a pivotal role in the development of this new vaccine. Welcome to Women's Hour. I understand, Mary, that you actually got malaria at one point in your life.
Good morning, Nina. Thank you for inviting me to join. And yes, by way of some background, yes, I did have malaria in 2008 when I was a medical student conducting some research in Uganda. I don't really remember too much about what happened, but I just remember feeling very unwell and it taking a long time to recover. But of course, the healthcare professionals are very experienced in dealing with malaria there, and they treated me very well. It just was a very frightening time.
Well, it goes full circle now because you had this role in developing the vaccine. What was your responsibility?
So, as was my responsibility. I was the clinical lead on the R21 phase 3 trial. I actually began working on this vaccine once the manufacturing had transferred to the Serum Institute of India. So my PhD actually looked at the early clinical development when we first put this vaccine into humans, tested if it was safe, if the immune system would work against the vaccine, and actually if it worked. So we went through all the exciting bursts, I guess, from the phase 1 to the phase 2, where we saw our exciting results in the Noro Burkina Faso of efficacy of 77% over 12 months, to now the phase 3 results and a policy recommendation and vaccine rollout just last week in children.
How amazing is that? I was watching part of the documentary where you're in the room, where you're waiting to see, will the WHO give the approval to your vaccine? You have the data, along with your colleagues, that you believe it should work, but WHO are independent. They have to do their own studies before something can be rolled out. What was it like? And also, what were you thinking when WHO gave the good news that it was approved?
So it was, I think I would say a whirlwind of emotions, some excitement, as well as almost relief, maybe a little bit of disbelief, but as you mentioned, the WHO did a rigorous assessment. We had been working towards this for the last couple of years ahead of the policy recommendation, and so I think the main thing at that point was, this is really exciting, but understandably we still have to continue doing all the work, making sure there is best practice, optimal care for clinical trial participants, making sure that we can completely carry on generating data, and then also the excitement of when this is actually going to be rolled out into children, aside from a clinical trial. And as we've discussed, that started happening last week, which was, a milestone moment, I think, for everyone involved.
Your supervisor, Adrian Hill, who's also in the documentary, he counted the amount of failed malaria vaccines, 142. But now that this is above the 75% efficacy rate, it's hundreds of thousands, I believe, this decade, which you then multiply by the coming decades. It's millions of children that can be saved.
Absolutely. If you take a step back and you think there are around 600,000 deaths a year, we really hope we can make a huge dent in that, so long as we can deliver the vaccine effectively. And similarly, because of our partnership with the Serum Institute of India, they have committed to providing the vaccine at just under $4 a dose and being able to manufacture around 100 million doses annually. So we really hope this will meet significant coverage of the target population.
And R21 is this particular vaccine. This is for children, which focuses, the documentary is on that too. But there is that question about, what about adult women? Because pregnant women, as we know, are also particularly vulnerable to malaria.
Yes, that's a very good point. We know that malaria affects pregnant women significantly. They're at risk of complications such as severe anemia, as well as consequences for the unborn baby, so miscarriages, preterm delivery, and stillbirths. So actually we are in the process of starting clinical trials in women, first of all, who intend to become pregnant, and then if there are no safety concerns, these trials will move into pregnant women, with the hope to generate sufficient data so that we can have an updated policy recommendation and the vaccine can be given to pregnant women also.
Is it easy to remain motivated working on a vaccine? I mean, obviously the rewards are immense, but it looked like really hard work as well.
So you're not wrong. It is very hard work, but I think the end goal is the motivation. If you think about that, actually in terms of cases, there are 240 million cases, 600,000 deaths a year from this disease. I think that's the motivation. Similarly, I work very closely with all our partners in Africa. They are the people that live and work with malaria every day, suffer the consequences, their families, their children, and working with them makes you more motivated. None of this effort would be possible without the global team and all the efforts of our trial sites. And it's amazing to be able to work with them and see the direct impact it would have on their lives, their families, their communities. 1970s, they're actually Afro-Islam.
Dr. Mary Datu, Clinical Research Fellow at the University of Oxford. Thank you so much for joining us. I know the hope is to eradicate malaria in the years to come. You can watch the Battle to Beat Malaria on BBC iPlayer if you haven't caught it yet. I do want to let you know that tomorrow Anita will be talking to the former British swimming champion Rebecca Ajulu-Bushell about her decision to quit the sport at just 17 and the price she says she paid for growing up in the pool. Very interesting interview to hear that one. Also, let us turn back to our emergency contacts so you can get in touch, 84844. Also get in touch, you give an idea for listener, we want to hear them all. There is no sense in putting your partner as your emergency contact if you're both travelling together. Even more so, scuba diving. It reminds me of an Australian comedy where the husband and wife are both kidnapped, leaving the kidnappers wondering who to call for the ransom. Meeting with you tomorrow. I'll speak to you on Monday. Have a good day.
Women's Hour was presented by Nuala McGovern and produced by Emma Pierce. Next on Radio 4, Michelle Hussein chairs the latest Today debate discussing the American presidential election, the implications both for the US and the wider world of the voters' verdict in November. And then, just after midday, once they literally couldn't give them away, now smart meter waiting lists are growing. We'll find out why on New News with Shami Hall.
On BBC iPlayer.
12 months ago, a bloke breaks down, never seen again. 4 months ago, a woman just vanishes into thin air.
You don't know what's happening here.
A strange crime mystery in the Australian Alps.
People keep telling me how easy it is to disappear and
more people are missing. I think it's this town's karma.
I've seen things that I can't explain. They're warnings.
High country.
Hey! Hey, who's out there?
Watch on BBC iPlayer.
BBC News at 11 o'clock. A man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a soldier in uniform was stabbed in Kent. The head of the army called the attack yesterday afternoon horrific and unprovoked. The soldier, who's in his 40s, is in serious condition in hospital. The Home Office says it's not treating the stabbing as terror-related. Kalisha Musandekwa lives near the scene of the attack.
We're just really shocked that something like this would happen so close to home, especially it being like a soldier and the barracks just being around the corner. We're just really, really surprised. Everyone's kind of got the same reaction, like, really? Did that seriously happen? Because it's so horrific. It's stuff that you watch in like TV shows and you can't believe it happens in your own neighbourhood.
New figures show the number of shoplifting offences recorded by police in England and Wales has risen to a 20-year high. The Office for National Statistics says a total of nearly 444,000 cases were logged in the year to March, up 30% on the previous 12 months. It said knife crime offences were up 4%, but were still below pre-pandemic levels. One of the Labour MPs suspended for voting in favour of lifting the two-child benefit cap says she slept well knowing that she had taken a stand. Zara Sultana and 6 other backbenchers will have to sit as independent MPs for the next 6 months after defying the party leadership. 18 passengers and crew have died in a plane crash in Nepal. The pilot was the only survivor. The aircraft crashed while it was taking off from the capital, Kathmandu. Sir Mick Jagger has led tributes to the British blues musician John Mayall, who has died at the age of 90. He called him a great pioneer with a wonderful eye for talent. John Mayall's band, the Blues Breakers, helped launch the careers of Eric Clapton and Peter Green and John McVie from Fleetwood Mac. BBC News.
A new government, new ministers, new people battling to be the voice of the opposition. So much has changed, but I'll still be trying to understand what makes those people tick. Their stories, their values, their backgrounds. There's more than one way to interview people, and on political thinking, it's a contrast to what I do in the day job. Not music, not an interrogation, a conversation. Join me, Nick Robinson, for a new series of political thinking on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds, Saturday afternoons at 5:30.
It's to American politics we turn now on Radio 4. In the Today debate, Michelle Hussein looks ahead to this year's US elections and asks what's at stake for America and the world.
Hello.
We know one thing for sure. In January 2025, a new US president will move into the White House, either Donald Trump or a Democratic Party candidate, most likely at this moment to be the current Vice President, Kamala Harris. Sunday's news that Joe Biden was no longer running for re-election came just 8 days after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. These are dramatic, febrile days in American politics, and the choices of the person elected once this process is over will reverberate around the world. That's what we will look at for the next 40 minutes, what we should be prepared for, the dynamics, the approach to global problems, whether in a second Trump presidency or a new Democratic administration. Welcome to the Today Debate. And thank you to everyone who is here with us in the audience at the Shaw Theatre in London, especially for your faith in us for booking tickets without having any idea what we would be discussing. And before we turn to the panel to introduce them and to hear their first thoughts, there is an extra Today programme vibe about this particular gathering, because very unusually for this time of day, I'm sitting not far away from Justin Webb, who has kindly managed to squeeze this debate in alongside Emergency Americas and many other demands on him as commentator and former BBC North America editor. Justin, welcome. It's odd that I get to say that to you. But just kick us off, if you will, with the 8 days, this extraordinary 8 days, and what happened at the beginning and end of them. How consequential do you think that period has been or will be for the eventual outcome of this election?
Well, I think there's no doubt that it's hugely consequential, in as much as it looked increasingly as if Joe Biden could not win and was not going to win. And that actually was before the 8 days. It was actually before the debate that went so disastrously from him. He was already on a glide path towards losing. And that glide path has been interrupted. It is still entirely possible that Donald Trump wins this, but it's not as certain as it seemed then to be. And then the events of the last 8 days or so have just thrown absolutely everything into the air. But what is still true is that whoever takes on the Democratic ticket, and it is almost certain now to be Kamala Harris, is in a hole. And they're in a hole because they have not got the electoral college votes that they need to win. And Donald Trump probably has about 268 of the 270 that he would need to win in the bag. The Democratic candidate, let's assume it's Kamala Harris, doesn't have that many. So there has got to be a pathway where she changes the conversation in certain states, because of course it's a national election, it's fought state by state, and what will eventually matter is a few states where decisions have to be made and where people have to be persuaded. So those things, all of the events of the last 8 days have thrown all that up in the air, but nothing so far, to stick with that analogy, has landed.
So however bouncy, fresh, confident she looks, she's actually got many, if not most, of the problems that Biden...
She's inherited a whole host of problems. The one thing she hasn't inherited is that her age begins with a 5. I mean, is that even allowed? I mean, it's extraordinary, and that is big. And I'm not suggesting that that doesn't itself have a game-changing quality about it, but when it comes to the southern border, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to what to do about Israel and Gaza, when it comes to all a host of other things, and particularly the things where Trump has been hammering Biden, and the domestic things where it has, to coin a phrase, nothing has changed.
To be discussed, lots of the issues you mentioned there. But let me first introduce everyone else who's here on the stage alongside us and taking part in this debate. And they include Bonnie Greer, born in Chicago. She's an author, playwright, a columnist for the New European newspaper and also for Byline Times, as well as a former deputy chair of the British Museum. Welcome to you, Bonnie. We also have Tim Stanley, columnist for The Telegraph and a specialist in US history. You've written a lot, Tim, about American conservatism, but you also wrote a book some years ago now, but it was a book about Ted Kennedy and Jimmy Carter and the run-up to the 1980 election. So you've covered all of these issues and continue to
to cover them with a historical lens. Sir Simon Fraser is a former head of the UK Foreign Office and Diplomatic Service, who then went on to co-found the advisory firm Flint Global. Welcome, Simon. You are also the incoming chair of the think tank Chatham House, which means that, if I can put it this way, you are probably sort of a think tank rival of our final panelist, Dr. Karen von Hippel, who is the Director General of the think tank RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, and also, Karen, you used to be with the State Department during the Obama years. So a warm welcome to you all. I want to get some initial thoughts from you, and perhaps, Karen, you could kick us off on this. As you think about these two possible and very different people and presidencies, Trump or Harris, what do you think the two of those will feel like, their tone, their emphasis for America and beyond?
Well, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here, and we have a warm and friendly relationship with Chatham House, so it's great to be here with Sir Simon. Look, I think this election is consequential in so many ways. I think if Harris wins, assuming she is a candidate, it will likely be a continuation of most of Biden's foreign policies. When she was a candidate for the president election last time around, when Biden ended up winning, she didn't have a lot of well-formed strategies, and she dropped out fairly quickly. But she's been learning a whole heck of a lot the last 4 or 5 years. So it's, on-the-job training like no other. And so I do think it would be continuity, and a lot of the same staff are now shifting over from the Biden campaign to work for her. If Trump wins, I mean, we all know that drill. I think this time around he would try to shake things up even more. He would bring in people who understand the system better. Last time around, they didn't understand the bureaucracy very well, so even if they wanted to break stuff, they weren't very good at it. At the same time, though,
Are you saying you think they will want to break stuff?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what they've said over and over again. But really, I think, don't forget that the world is changing in many profound ways. If we're becoming more multilateral, we're shifting away from this post-World War II order into something new. And so China has risen, other powers, even small powers, are asserting themselves in ways they haven't before. So it will be a different world no matter what, but it can go in one of two directions depending on who wins.
Tim Sadley, if you're an American voter, who would you be voting for this time?
Oh gosh, well, let's weigh up the choice. First of all, I am relieved that it's not Biden, it's Trump, that sort of geriatric face-off. Kamala Harris is a historic choice. She is, in American political terms, veritably adolescent. She is a woman of color, that's historic, and whatever straight white man she runs with, she's going to represent change, right? On the other hand, she'll be continuity, because she's inheriting Biden's campaign, she's going to inherit his advisors, and in many senses, this is going to be the 50th year of the Obama administration, the brief interregnum of Trump's presidency. By contrast, if Trump runs, well, a lot of people are saying it's going to be very good. Not bad. I think it's going to be slightly different from his first administration, and that was shown in his choice of J.D. Vance. He was forced to pick Mike Pence last time because he entered office married to the Republican establishment with their agenda and their personnel. And he discovered he actually didn't really like their agenda, and he had to sack all their personnel. And this time around, it's going to be his own people pushing his own projects and his own approach.
And do you find them compelling? Do you find the prospect of a Trump presidency compelling?
I do. Look, so you're asking me the question between the two of them, which do I think is the better buy? Well, first of all, I think we'll discover in the course of this debate that they're a lot more similar than we realize. I think left and right are both bitten by the populist bug. Both are about withdrawal from the Middle East. Both are about reshoring jobs. Both are about controlling immigration, actually. But if you were just judging it by boring material strata, if you were just saying who's done the best job, well, I would say that under Donald Trump, the American economy grew very fast, immigration after peaking declined, and crucially, there was no war. Under Barack Obama, there was war with Russia. Under Trump, peace. Under Joe Biden, war with Russia. So I think it would be perfectly rational for people to look at the choice and say, Trump, you know what? He wasn't that bad.
So you'd vote for him?
What I'm saying, and I'm the only English person, I'm probably the only English person who would go on record and say I would not vote for him.
Bonnie Greer.
Trump's peace is the peace of isolationism.
Trump's peace is the peace of appeasement. Trump's peace is the peace of transactional activity. We have to remember that the American electorate directly elects the President of the United States. Our politics here, I can vote in both countries, our politics here is becoming more presidential in that we are thinking more about the personality of the leader of the two parties who are in charge. But we do not elect the Prime Minister. In America, they elect the President of the United States. It's direct, as Tim has said. So therefore, it's always very personal. It's always very emotional. It's always very direct. Donald Trump presents an literal and existential threat to the Republic. He presents a threat to the Constitution of the United States. He was quite willing to foment an insurrection against the United States. You can call it whatever you like or however it looked. That's what he did. So we have to start from that point and ask ourselves, is he fit to be president of this republic? And of course he isn't. However, the other side of that is that there has been, over I'd say the last 30 years, a huge sort of demographic shift. The country is becoming majority minority, and that presents a real fear to the present minority. And Trump, because he's a salesman, he's a master salesman, he understands that this trend is there and he taps into it. And that's why he's a very dangerous man. He has no interest in governing. He has no interest other than in the trappings of the presidency. And there's a very interesting, I know we all know this phrase that allegedly Stalin used for so-called American communists, and the term is useful idiot. And Trump is the useful idiot of very serious forces like the Heritage Foundation, who are hell-bent on reconstructing the state.
Just before I bring in Simon Fraser, I just want to come back to you, Tim Stanley, on one thing. January the 6th, are you able to, does it not give you pause? Are you able to overlook it?
Pause. It self-evidently is unacceptable and makes him an unconscionable candidate. I'm not going to, which is why I said I'm reluctant to say I would vote for him, but I instead pass it and say I would not vote for him. It is totally unacceptable, but in politics, as we faced in the last election, you don't always get the choice you want. You have to go with the realistic choice between two alternatives, and I'm just saying that on a retail basis, everything Bonnie has just, a lot of what Bonnie just said is quite accurate, of course it is, but you're asking voters to choose very simple things. Do you want a strong economy? Do you want peace? And I'm just saying that many voters will look back and say Trump gave both.
But Tim, we also have to remember that, and you know this as a scholar, that America is an idea. It's the first nation built on an idea. The idea is about liberty and all men are created equal. There was, during that insurrection, a Confederate battle flag walked through Statuary Hall. People died in order to keep that from not happening. That is a very strong narrative in America. That man enabled that to happen. He is unfit for office.
Okay.
Equally strong narrative. Someone shot at and tried to kill him.
Exactly.
And that is why a lot of people will rally around him, because they see him as different this time around, transformed by the assassination attempt.
Let me bring in Simon Fraser, who's been waiting patiently. So, with all your experience as a former British diplomat, Simon, do you think, how do you assess the prospects of these two very different people in the White House?
Well, of course, patience is very important in diplomacy. I'm pleased to speak. And I have to say, Tim, frankly, it's a bit difficult for me to accept that we should somehow attribute responsibility for Putin's invasion of Ukraine to Joe Biden. I'm not sure that he's responsible for that war, although I do support the posture he's taken on it. But what I want to say is this: if you are anyone sitting in this room, if you are British or European person looking at this election, it matters hugely for us, the outcome of this election, because America is the preeminent power in the world, economically, politically, in military terms. America still underpins our security here in Europe, and therefore what happens in this election matters a lot to us. Now, I absolutely agree that populism is biting both sides, and that whoever wins, it is going to be America first. Let's be clear about that. That will be the agenda. However, I do believe that the Democratic Party, under Kamala Harris, still will espouse a sort of principle of international cooperation, relationships with other democracies and allies, which is really important to us. Whereas Donald Trump represents something very different in international affairs, a far more transactional, nationalist approach to the world, which is sort of values free, if you like. And that poses real challenges for us and difficulties for us. So that's why the outcome matters a lot to us.
Justin, guide us on what it looks like Donald Trump most wants to do on day one or the first period in the White House. What do we know about his?
What he said was be a dictator, although he may well have been joking, and he probably only meant that one day, although it's being used against him quite a lot. In other words, I mean, what he meant, I think, was to use executive orders to do stuff and to do it quickly, whatever Congress thought. What are those things when it comes to domestic affairs? He has an agenda that I think rather clashes in a way, in an interesting way, with what he says has been the principal disaster of the Biden administration. He says the principal disaster of the Biden administration, well, two of them actually, one immigration, but this one is inflation. And indeed it is a really difficult one for Biden and now for Kamala Harris to deal with, because there has of course been inflation, and although it has been very successfully dealt with in the United States, the prices have not necessarily gone down. That inflation is baked in and people really feel it, and he says he wants to get rid of that, but he also says he wants a general tariff of I think 10% on everything coming in, and he also wants to have an impact on interest rates that keep them low. All of these things you would expect, if you were half an economist, would lead to more inflation. So in other words, his economic policies, the things he is promising to do, I think a lot of people would say won't necessarily come to pass because they wouldn't provide the things that he wanted provided. And in foreign affairs, I think we're all agreed, I think everyone's agreed, he is transactional. He would make phone calls, as he said in his speech to the convention, which he would expect to have an impact. He would absolutely be willing to do deals with anyone, anywhere. And I think that is the thing that kind of separates him off, in a sense, from Kamala Harris and actually, more generally, from the American mainstream that has been in power since the time of Ronald Reagan.
Well, actually, I want to drill down into two areas of foreign policy. Both have been touched upon very briefly, but particularly Ukraine, NATO, Russia, and also Israel and Gaza, which I'll get to in just a moment. Karen, let's just look at Ukraine and Russia and what he is likely to do. Do you think he will force Ukraine to negotiate?
I mean, he might try, but it's really up to the Ukrainians to decide when they want to end the war. He would cut off U.S. assistance to Ukraine, and that would be very difficult for Ukraine. Europe isn't quite ready to provide a lot of extra assistance. They're not as organized militarily as they need to be. They're planning this time very differently than they planned last time. I think last time when Trump won, no one anticipated it would happen. And so the muscle memory just was such that, as Sir Simon said, America leads and we work with America. This time around, I think the Europeans in particular do realize they will have to do a lot more to help Ukraine. So I think that's what Trump is threatening. But the reality is, he says all sorts of things and then he changes his mind very quickly, and it depends on, who the last person is who spoke to him. So I personally just don't take too many of these things that he says he will do seriously, because he doesn't really understand what a strategy is. He doesn't understand how to implement a strategy, but he's got he likes his impulses and he wants to decide at the moment. So it also doesn't really matter who his vice president is either, because that person will be a talking head for him, it will be a proxy for him, but he wants to make every decision on his own.
Yeah, except that J.D. Vance has got some very strong views on Ukraine, which can't be ignored.
He could get fired for all we know. Trump likes to fire people. Let's not forget that.
Simon Fraser, but this point on Ukraine could be a very important early test of the American-European, not just the American-British and that transatlantic relationship, but of